In a small village in Ghana, Alma falls in love with Kojo, a charming trader who promises her the world. But when she tells him she's pregnant, he disappears without a trace, leaving her heartbroken and alone. Years later, Kojo returns as a wealthy man, only to find life has its own plans. The woman he betrayed now holds the key to his downfall, and what follows proves that karma never forgets, especially when love turns into revenge. When my grandpa Kato passed away in our small village of Mto Wambu, the house was full of people, but not of tears. Everyone whispered about who would get his money, his land, his cows. I sat quietly, holding the memory of his weak hand in mine from the night before he died. He had looked at me with tired eyes and said, "The bees know the truth, Ao. Don't let them die." So when it was time to speak, I told everyone I didn't want the money or the land. I wanted his tiny bee farm. The room went silent, and then came the laughter. My aunt shook her head and said, "You'd rather play with bees than build a real life." My cousins smirked, whispering that I'd lost my mind. I didn't argue. I just kept thinking about Grandpa's words. To them, it was a useless piece of land with a few broken hives. To me, it was a promise. I didn't know anything about bees, or even how to start, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't let Grandpa's bees die. I left the house that day with nothing but a small bag, his old hat, and a promise burning inside me. Everyone thought I was foolish, chasing a dead man's dream. But deep down, I felt something different, a quiet calling. I didn't know it then, but that tiny bee farm would become the beginning of a story none of them would ever forget. When I finally reached Grandpa's bee farm, my heart sank. It didn't look anything like the place I remembered from my childhood. The wooden hives were broken and covered in moss. The flowers that once danced with color were gone, replaced by tall, dry weeds. The air was quiet, too quiet. No buzzing, no life, just silence and the smell of rot. I stood there, staring at what used to be Grandpa's pride, and for the first time, I wondered if everyone had been right. Maybe I really was wasting my time. As I started cleaning up, my cousin Kito drove by in his old pickup truck. He slowed down, looked at me, and shouted with a smirk, "Still chasing ghosts, Ao." Then he laughed and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. His words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I didn't even know how to care for a single hive. I didn't know where to start. All I had was Grandpa's voice in my head and the promise I made to him. That night, I sat on the old wooden porch under the stars. The village was quiet, and the moonlight made the empty hives look like sleeping soldiers waiting for orders. I felt small and lost. Then, as I moved some of Grandpa's old tools, I found a dusty box hidden beneath them. Inside was his old leather journal. The pages were yellow and smelled like smoke and honey. I opened it carefully, and my eyes widened. It was filled with his drawings, maps of hives, sketches of wildflowers, and detailed notes about the bees. He had written down everything he had learned over the years. On the last few pages, I found something that caught my attention, a recipe titled "Golden Elixir Honey." There were measurements, flower types, and even small drawings of bees flying around blossoms I didn't recognize. Next to it, he had written, "The secret is not in the honey, but in the harmony." I read those words over and over again. I didn't fully understand them, but they gave me hope. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I walked around the field and imagined what it could look like again: flowers blooming, bees flying, hives full of life. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice guiding me. My hands were shaking, but I felt something I hadn't felt in days: purpose. That old journal became my guide, my teacher, and my only friend. From that moment, I decided that I would rebuild everything from the ground up. I didn't care how long it took or how hard it would be. I would bring the bees back. I would make Grandpa proud. And I would prove to everyone, including myself, that this useless bee farm still had life left in it. That night, as I closed my eyes, I whispered to the stars, "I'll wake the bees again, Grandpa." Just watch me. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Every morning I woke up before sunrise and worked until the sky turned red again. I started by fixing the broken hives, one nail at a time. My hands were full of splinters, my clothes always sticky with sweat, and my back ached every night. I didn't have fancy tools or much money, so I used whatever I could find, old wood, rusted nails, and my own determination. I built new hives, cleaned the land, and planted rows of bright, nectar-rich flowers that Grandpa had written about in his journal. I wanted the bees to have a home worth returning to. But the work was not kind to me. The sun burned my skin, and the stings never stopped. I got stung so many times that my arms looked swollen and red. My face itched, my hands shook, and sometimes I couldn't even sleep from the pain. The neighbors would walk by and whisper, "Poor Ao, he's lost his mind. Talking to bees that don't even exist." Some would laugh, others would shake their heads. Even Mama stopped calling for a while. I think she was scared I'd truly gone mad chasing Grandpa's dream. My savings were almost gone. There were nights when I didn't have enough money for food, so I just drank water and went to bed hungry. The silence of the empty hives was the worst part, it felt like the land itself had given up. I started to wonder if I should too. One evening, after a long, painful day, I was moving a hive when a bee stung me right on the cheek. It hurt so bad that I dropped everything and fell to the ground. I sat there, covered in dirt and sweat, tears running down my face, not from the sting, but from exhaustion and disappointment. I looked up at the dark sky and whispered, "Grandpa, I tried. Maybe they're really gone." I closed my eyes, ready to give up. But then, in the quiet night, I heard something soft, like a whisper carried by the wind. A faint buzzing sound. I thought I was imagining it, but then it grew louder. I stood up slowly and turned toward the old tree near the fence. There they were, 3, maybe 4 bees flying in circles. My heart raced. I held my breath and watched as they hovered near the flowers I had planted, landing one by one. I couldn't stop smiling. The next morning, there were more. A few here, a few there. Within days, the faint buzz turned into a gentle hum that filled the air. The bees were coming home. The same neighbors who mocked me started watching from afar. I didn't say a word. I just kept working, this time with a lighter heart. The bees had returned, and with them, my hope. Months passed, and my days slowly found rhythm. The once dead fields were now full of color. The wildflowers I planted had grown tall, and the buzzing of bees filled the air from sunrise to sunset. Every time I walked through the hives, I could feel Grandpa's spirit there with me. It wasn't easy, many days I still woke up sore, covered in stings, but I had learned to move carefully, to listen to the bees, to feel their rhythm. They weren't just insects anymore. They were family. Then one morning, as the sun spread golden light across the farm, I knew it was time. The hives were full. The bees had worked for months, and now it was my turn to see what they had created. My hands trembled as I opened the first hive. The smell hit me first, sweet, warm, and rich. Slowly, I poured the honey into glass jars, and my breath caught. It shimmered like melted gold. It wasn't much, just a few jars, but to me, it was everything. I had done it. I sat down under the shade of the big tree, opened one jar, and dipped my finger in. The taste was unreal, sweet, floral, and deep, like the land itself had given me a gift. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa." But I didn't want the honey to sit there, I wanted people to taste it. So I took one jar, packed it carefully, and went to the market in Arusha. My heart raced as I stood behind a small wooden table, surrounded by other vendors selling fruits and crafts. People walked by without stopping. Some smiled politely but kept moving. I started to wonder if I had made a mistake. Then, a woman dressed in white stopped by my table. She was from a luxury spa nearby, judging by her uniform and calm voice. She looked at the golden jar and asked, "Is that real honey?" I nodded and handed her a small spoonful to taste. The moment she tried it, she froze. Her eyes widened. She looked at me like she couldn't believe what she'd just tasted. "Where did you get this?" she asked softly. "It's from my grandfather's farm," I said. "I call it Cato's gold." She smiled, still amazed. "I've never tasted anything like this. I want 50 jars, for my clients." I couldn't speak for a moment. 50 jars. My heart pounded in my chest. I managed to nod and thank her. As she walked away, I sat down and stared at the golden jars shining in the sunlight. The same honey everyone once laughed at had just made its first sale. When I went home that evening, I didn't feel tired for the first time in months. The air smelled sweeter, the bees buzzed louder, and I realized something important: the world was finally beginning to taste the truth that Grandpa had always known. One morning, everything changed. I woke up to dozens of missed calls and messages. At first, I thought something bad had happened. But when I opened my phone, I saw a video. A tourist had filmed me working barefoot in the middle of the hives, talking softly to the bees like they were my friends. The caption read, "The Bee Whisperer of Tanzania." Within hours, the video spread everywhere. Thousands of people were sharing it. Some called me crazy, but most were amazed. They said the way I treated the bees, with respect and love, was something the world needed to see. By the end of the day, my inbox was full of messages. People from all over Africa and even Europe were asking how they could buy my honey. My small farm, which once struggled to fill 50 jars, now had hundreds of orders waiting. I couldn't believe it. The same land that people once called useless had suddenly become the center of attention. I worked day and night to keep up. I hired a few young men from the village, boys who had dropped out of school, struggling to find hope. I taught them what Grandpa taught me: patience, care, and respect for nature. Together, we built more hives, planted more flowers, and worked as a team. The farm started to look alive again, not just with bees, but with laughter, music, and hard work. I decided to give it a name that would honor the man who started it all. I called it Cato's Gold Honey. As the orders grew, so did our confidence. We began packaging the honey in glass jars with simple labels, each one showing Grandpa's old hat and the line, "Born from the truth of the bees." People loved the story behind it. They said it tasted like hope. News stations came to film us. Local schools invited me to speak. I shared how I went from being laughed at to running a growing business. But more than that, I shared what the bees had taught me, that even the smallest things can create the sweetest results if you care enough. Soon, young people from nearby villages started visiting, asking if I could teach them beekeeping. I opened the farm to them, turning it into a small training center. We didn't just produce honey, we produced knowledge, skills, and purpose. Boys who once thought life had no future were now building hives and earning income. Girls who had never worked on farms were learning to handle bees fearlessly. Everywhere I looked, there was life. The once silent fields now buzzed with thousands of wings. The same neighbors who had mocked me now lined up at my gate asking for jobs. I welcomed them with a smile. I wasn't angry anymore. The bees had taught me forgiveness. My small promise to Grandpa had turned into something far bigger than I ever imagined, a buzzing empire built from hope, hard work, and honey. When my story started showing up on TV and the internet, my phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews, customers wanted honey, and suddenly, even my family, those who had once laughed at me, wanted to visit. It started with my parents, who hadn't been to the farm in years. Mama hugged me tightly, her eyes full of pride. "Ayo, everyone in the village is talking about you," she said. "Your grandfather would be so proud." I smiled, happy to see her smile again. But soon after, the others arrived, uncles, aunts, cousins, all dressed nicely, carrying fake smiles and sweet words. They looked around the farm with wide eyes, whispering about how big it had become. My uncle, the same one who once called the bees a waste of time, patted me on the shoulder. "We always knew you'd make Grandpa proud," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. My aunt added quickly, "Yes, Ao, this is amazing. You shouldn't handle all this work alone. We should manage this together, as a family." Her tone was soft, but her eyes were already calculating. For a moment, I just watched them, remembering that day at Grandpa's funeral, the laughter, the sneers, the way they mocked me for choosing the bee farm instead of cash. Back then, I stayed silent because I was young and unsure. But now, I was different. I had built this from nothing. I had carried Grandpa's dream with my own hands, through the sweat, the stings, and the sleepless nights. So I smiled politely and said, "I already have a family." They looked confused. I nodded toward the hives buzzing nearby and added, "The bees." Their smiles faded a little, but they tried to laugh it off. My aunt reached out and said, "Come on, Ao. You can't do everything yourself. Let us help you. You know, keep it in the family." My uncle nodded, pretending to agree, but I could see the greed in his eyes. He wasn't thinking about family, he was thinking about profit. I walked into the small office near the hives and came back holding a folded piece of paper. I handed it to my uncle and said calmly, "Do you remember this?" He opened it, his smile disappearing as he read. It was Grandpa's will, the same one they ignored at the funeral. It clearly stated that the land and everything on it belonged to me alone. The silence that followed was thick. My aunt looked away. My uncle coughed and said, of course, we just wanted to make sure you're managing things well." I smiled again, this time without pretending. "I am," I said. "And I'll keep doing so." They left soon after, their voices low, their smiles gone. I watched their car disappear down the dusty road, then turned back to the hives. The bees buzzed softly, calm and steady. I whispered, "Don't worry, Grandpa. I won't let them take what we built." It was a bright morning when I received an email that made me stop in my tracks. The subject line read, "Business Proposal, Cato's Gold Honey." At first, I thought it was a scam. But when I opened it, I realized it was real. A foreign investor from South Africa had seen my story online and wanted to meet in person. He was offering a partnership, an international export deal worth $2 million. I read the message 3 times, my hands shaking. $2 million. I sat down on the porch, surrounded by the sound of bees, and laughed in disbelief. The same farm everyone once called useless was now being noticed by the world. A week later, the investor arrived at the farm in a shiny black car. He was polite, dressed sharply, and spoke with excitement about how Cato's Gold Honey could become a global brand. "Your honey has a unique taste," he said. "It tells a story. People everywhere would want to taste that." He handed me the contract, his pen ready. My workers gathered nearby, pretending not to look, but I could feel their eyes on me. These were the same young men and women who once had nothing, no jobs, no direction. Now they stood tall, confident, and proud of the work they did every day. I looked around the farm, the rows of flowers dancing in the wind, the golden hives glistening under the sun, the people laughing as they packed jars of honey. I remembered every sting, every night I almost gave up, every person who said I couldn't make it. This was more than a business to me. It was a promise. A promise I made to Grandpa, to the bees, and to everyone who believed that dreams could grow from dirt. The investor waited patiently, smiling. I took a deep breath and finally said, "I'll sign this deal, but I have one condition." He raised an eyebrow, curious. "What condition?" he asked. "I want part of the investment to go toward building a community training center," I said. "A place where young people can learn sustainable farming and beekeeping, for free. If we're going global, we have to make sure our people grow with us." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he smiled and extended his hand. "You've got yourself a deal, Mr. Cato." As I signed the contract, I felt a rush of pride. Not just for the money or the success, but for what it meant. The bees had brought us more than honey, they had brought us hope, jobs, and knowledge. That evening, my team and I stood together watching the sunset over the golden fields. I told them, "The world will taste our honey, but we'll keep the wisdom behind it." The bees buzzed around us like tiny blessings, and I knew in that moment that Grandpa's dream had finally gone beyond the borders of our village, and into the hearts of the world.